Will Representative Ilhan Omar's political career survive the exact moment Senator John Kennedy opens his devastating manila folder on live television? She thought she would defeat him. She was entirely wrong. Ilhan Omar stood in the packed hearing room, pointing directly at John Kennedy. "You represent everything wrong with America's past, the shameful legacy of prejudice against immigrants and minority communities that we must overcome." Ilhan Omar's voice rang through the packed House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing room. Her designer hijab caught the television lights as she gestured dramatically. The young congresswoman from Minnesota stood at the witness table, having been granted special questioning privileges for what was supposed to be a routine hearing on refugee resettlement policies. "Senator Kennedy, you sit there in your expensive suit with your Southern drawl, pretending to care about human rights while your entire career has been built on excluding people like me from the American dream." The gallery erupted in applause from the progressive activists who had arrived before dawn to support Omar. Many wore hijabs in solidarity, and several held signs reading, "Refugees welcome and no human is illegal." The mainstream media section was packed with reporters whose stories about Kennedy's impending humiliation were already half-written on their laptops. Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat quietly at the witness table, his silver hair perfectly styled, wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He wore a charcoal suit that indeed looked expensive, though not ostentatious. As Omar's attacks grew more personal, several observers noticed something peculiar, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth, as if he were enjoying a private joke. "You've never known struggle or persecution," Omar continued, her voice rising with righteous anger. "You've never had to flee your homeland, never spent years in a refugee camp, never had to build a life from nothing in a country where people like you view people like me as threats to be eliminated rather than humans to be welcomed." She paused for effect, basking in the approving murmurs from her supporters. "What could you possibly know about the refugee experience? What qualifies you to sit in judgment of policies affecting the most vulnerable people on Earth?" Kennedy continued taking notes on the legal pad before him, his expression serene. When Omar finally paused, expecting him to be rattled or defensive, he looked up with what appeared to be genuine warmth in his pale blue eyes. "Thank you for that passionate speech about struggle and persecution, ma'am," Kennedy said in his characteristic Louisiana drawl, each word measured and wrapped in Southern courtesy. "You raise important points about understanding different experiences. And speaking of experiences, perhaps we should explore yours a bit more thoroughly." He opened the manila folder that had been sitting closed on the table throughout Omar's tirade. The committee room, which had been buzzing with whispered conversations, suddenly grew quiet. "You mentioned building a life from nothing in America," Kennedy continued, extracting a document from the folder. "Let's discuss how you built that life. Specifically, let's talk about your marriage in 2009. Omar's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "My personal life has nothing to do with—" "Oh, but it does, ma'am," Kennedy interrupted gently. "You see, questions have been raised about this particular marriage to Mr. Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi." He paused, studying the document. "Your brother?" The committee room erupted. Progressive supporters shouted lies and intolerance, while reporters frantically began typing. Several Democratic committee members looked genuinely confused, having not expected this turn. Omar's face had gone from confident to frozen. "That's a disgusting conspiracy theory that has been thoroughly debunked." "Has it?" Kennedy asked mildly. He pulled out another set of documents. "Because I have here educational records from the United Kingdom showing that Mr. Elmi attended school there, listing the same father's name as appears on your refugee documents. I have sworn affidavits from members of the Minneapolis Somali community confirming the family relationship. And most interesting of all," he paused for effect, "I have records showing that you, your cultural husband Ahmed Hirsi, and your legal husband Mr. Elmi all lived at the same address in Columbia Heights, Minnesota." The silence in the room was deafening. Even Omar's most ardent supporters had stopped shouting. "Now, ma'am," Kennedy continued in the same conversational tone, "in most cultures, it's unusual for a woman to live with both her husband and her brother. It's even more unusual when she's legally married to the brother but filing taxes jointly with the other man." He produced another document. These are your tax returns from 2014 and 2015. You filed jointly with Mr. Hersey while being legally married to Mr. Elmi. That's tax fraud, ma'am. But more importantly, if Mr. Elmi is indeed your brother, as the evidence suggests, then we're relooking at immigration fraud, a federal offense involving helping a family member obtain U.S. citizenship through a sham marriage. Omar found her voice, though it lacked its earlier strength. These are fabricated documents. This is nothing but a biased attack. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted with exaggerated politeness. Math isn't prejudiced. DNA isn't biased. And speaking of DNA, he pulled out yet another document. This is a formal request from the Daily Mail newspaper dated October 2019, asking you to take a DNA test to disprove these allegations once and for all. You refused multiple times. If Mr. Elmi isn't your brother, wouldn't a simple DNA test clear this up immediately? One of the Democratic committee members quietly removed her I Stand with Ilhan pin and placed it face down on the desk. Others were frantically checking their phones, presumably trying to figure out how to distance themselves from what was unfolding. But we were just getting started, Kennedy said cheerfully, organizing his papers for the next revelation. Shall we continue exploring how you've built your American success story? I think the committee would be very interested in your campaign finance activities. Omar gripped the edge of the witness table, her knuckles white. The hunter had become the hunted, and everyone in the room could see it. The Southern gentleman with the gentle smile and devastating documents had just begun his methodical destruction of one of the progressive movement's rising stars. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and pulled out a new section from his folder labeled in neat typescript Immigration Records, Omar Elmi. The committee room remained tensely quiet, the earlier chaos replaced by the atmosphere of a courtroom watching crucial evidence being presented. Let's explore this marriage timeline in detail, shall we? Kennedy began, his tone suggesting he was about to explain something simple to a child. According to public records, in 2002 you entered into an Islamic faith marriage with Ahmed Abdisalan Hirsi. Is that correct? Omar's jaw was clenched tight. Yes, we had a religious ceremony. And you had 2 children with Mr. Hersey during this time? Yes, but in 2008, you separated from Mr. Hersey. Not legally divorced, since you weren't legally married, but separated? Yes. Kennedy nodded as if filing away important information. And then, in 2009, you legally married Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, a legal marriage this time, with a certificate filed with the state of Minnesota. I've explained this, please. Ma'am, let's establish the facts first, Kennedy said patiently. Now, here's where it gets interesting. He produced a series of documents and laid them out on the table. These are lease agreements, utility bills, and voter registrations. They show that during your marriage to Mr. Elmi, all 3 of you yourself, Mr. Hersey, with whom you dabbed children, and Mr. Elmi, to whom you were legally married, were living at the same address in Columbia Heights. He looked up at the committee. I don't know about why, all, but where I come from in Louisiana, that's what we call a mighty unusual living arrangement. Nervous laughter rippled through the room. Several Democratic committee members were now actively avoiding looking at Omar. But it gets more unusual, Kennedy continued, warming to his theme. Because while you were living in this, let's call it a communal situation, you were also helping Mr. Elmi with his education. He pulled out another document. This is Mr. Elmi's student visa application for North Dakota State University, sponsored by his wife, you making him eligible for in-state tuition and, more importantly, able to stay in the United States. This is all circumstantial, Omar began. Is it? Well, then let's look at some less circumstantial evidence. Kennedy's smile widened as he pulled out his next surprise. I have here social media posts that you thought were deleted, but the internet, as they say, is forever. He held up printed screenshots. This is from Mr. Elmi's Instagram in 2013. He's referring to your daughter as his niece, not stepdaughter, which she would be if he were just your husband. Niece. That's an interesting word choice, don't you think? The progressive supporters in the gallery had gone completely silent. Some were beginning to edge toward the exits. But wait, there's more. Kennedy continued, clearly enjoying himself now. Let's examine these educational records from the United Kingdom, where Mr. Elmi attended high school. He produced official-looking documents with British government seals. Father's name, Nur Saeed Elmi. Now let's look at your refugee application from 1995. Another document appeared. Father's name, Nur Saeed Elmi. He looked up at Omar with an expression of mock confusion. Now, ma'am, either this is the world's most remarkable coincidence, or Mr. Ahmed Elmi is your brother. Which is it? Omar's response was nearly shouted. My father's name was changed when we came to America. This is common for refugees. Indeed it is, Kennedy agreed amiably, which is why I had my staff dig deeper. He pulled out yet another set of papers. These are affidavits from 6 members of the Minneapolis Somali community, all sworn under penalty of perjury. They all confirm that Ahmed Elmi is your brother. One of them, Mrs. Fadumo Hassan, says she knew your family in Somalia before you fled. She's quite specific about the family relationships. The committee room was beginning to feel like a pressure cooker. Even the C-SPAN camera operators seemed to be paying closer attention than usual. Now, here's the definitive proof, Kennedy said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. He pulled out a printed email. This is an email exchange between you and Mr. Elmi from 2011, retrieved through a public records request. You thought it was deleted, but government servers have long memories. He began to read. Thanks for helping me get papers. Sister, I'll make sure to pay you back when I get to London. That's from Mr. Elmi to you, ma'am. Your response, no need to pay back. Family helps family. Just be careful and delete these emails. Gasps echoed through the committee room. One Democratic member muttered an audible exclamation of shock, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Thanks for helping me get papers, sister, Kennedy repeated slowly. Not wife, sister. And your response about family, helping family, that's pretty clear, wouldn't you say? Omar's face had gone from defensive to desperate. That email is fake. This is all fabricated by the State Department, Kennedy asked innocently. Because that's where this email came from? Official government servers, date-stamped, authenticated, and provided under the Freedom of Information Act. He wasn't done. Now let's talk about the tax implications of this arrangement. While you were legally married to Mr. Elmi, you filed joint tax returns with Mr. Hersey in 2014 and 2015. Here are the returns. He held up the documents, Omar's signature clearly visible. You signed these under penalty of perjury, claiming to be married to a man you weren't married to, while being legally married to another man entirely. I've already corrected those filings. After you were caught, Kennedy clarified, and only after conservative journalists started investigating. But correcting tax fraud after the fact doesn't make it not tax fraud, ma'am. It just makes it admitted tax fraud. He pulled out one final document from this section. This is from the IRS Criminal Division. They've opened an investigation based on these fraudulent returns. Did you know that? They were particularly interested in the fact that you claimed tax benefits you weren't entitled to by filing jointly with someone you weren't married to. 3 Democratic committee members stood up and left the room entirely. The exodus was beginning. But here's what really troubles me, Kennedy said, leaning back in his chair. It's not just the fraud, though immigration, deception, and tax violations are serious federal offenses. It's the fact that when caught, instead of coming clean, you attacked anyone who questioned you as biased and prejudiced. You used your identity as a shield while committing acts that would land any other American in federal prison. He gestured to the documents spread before him. Marriage deception to get your brother U.S. citizenship, tax violations to get benefits you weren't entitled to, and then playing the victim when caught. Is this the American success story you were so proud of? Omar's hands were visibly shaking now. Her chief aide was whispering urgently in her ear, likely advising her to invoke her rights and stop talking. I need to consult with my attorney, Omar stammered. By all means, Kennedy said graciously. But before you do, you should know we're just getting started. Wait until we get to your campaign finance violations. Those are particularly illuminating. He smiled, that gentle southern smile that had become terrifying to everyone on Omar's side of the room. Shall we take a 5-minute break? I imagine some folks might need to make some phone calls, maybe to their attorneys or their campaign donors or their fellow Democrats who might be reconsidering their support right about now. The committee chairman, a Democrat who looked like he aged 10 years in the past 30 minutes, reluctantly called for a recess. As people began to file out, Kennedy remained seated, calmly organizing his papers for round 3. The marriage scandal had exploded even more devastatingly than Omar's worst nightmares could have imagined, and there were still hours to go. When the committee reconvened, several seats on the Democratic side remained conspicuously empty. Omar had returned, flanked now by 2 attorneys who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her earlier confidence had evaporated entirely, replaced by the hunted look of someone who knew the worst was yet to come. Kennedy seemed refreshed by the break, sitting through the reconvening formalities with the patience of a man who had all day to dismantle his target. When recognized to continue, he opened a new section of his folder marked Campaign Finance Minette. Now, ma'am, let's discuss your relationship with Mr. Tim Minette and his company E Street Group, Kennedy began, his tone suggesting this would be even more damaging than what came before. Omar's lawyers immediately tensed. One whispered urgently in her ear, but she waved him off. According to Federal Election Commission records, Kennedy continued, your campaign paid Mr. Minette's company approximately $370,000 between 2018 and 2019. During this same period, you were having an extramarital affair with Mr. Minette. Is that correct? My personal relationships are not. They are when campaign funds are involved, Kennedy interrupted smoothly. But let's let someone else tell the story. He pulled out a thick document. This is the divorce deposition of Mrs. Beth Minette, given under oath in D.C. Superior Court. Shall I read some relevant portions? Without waiting for an answer, he began. My husband told me in April 2019 that he was having an affair with Congresswoman Omar. He said he'd been traveling with her on campaign trips that I now believe were personal in nature. When I asked how they could afford all this travel, he said, "Don't worry about it. Ilhan's campaign is covering everything." The committee room had gone dead silent again. Even the reporters had stopped typing, mesmerized by the unfolding scandal. But that's just her word, right? Kennedy said conversationally. Except, he pulled out another document. Here are credit card receipts from those trips. Romantic dinners for 2 in Nice, France, paid for by Omar for Congress. A couple's spa retreat in Napa Valley campaign funds. Hotel suites with 1 bed in cities where no campaign events were scheduled, all billed to Minnesota donors. Those were legitimate campaign expenses, Omar protested weakly. Really? Because I have something that suggests otherwise. Kennedy pulled out his phone and connected it to the committee's audio system. This is a text message from Mr. Minette to his wife, recorded during their divorce proceedings. A man's voice filled the room. Stop calling me about money. I told you, Ilhan's campaign is paying for everything right now. Just be patient until the divorce is final. Several people in the gallery gasped. One of Omar's own staffers was seen putting her head in her hands. Campaign funds paying for everything, Kennedy repeated. That's interesting language for legitimate political consulting, wouldn't you say? But Kennedy wasn't done. Let's talk about after your affair became public and you married Mr. Minette in March 2020. Did the payments stop? Oh, no. They increased. He pulled out more FEC records. Your campaign paid your new husband's company another $1.1 million in 2020 alone, making him one of the highest-paid political consultants in America. Quite a wedding gift. He looked up at the committee. Now, I'm just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana, but where I come from, using campaign funds to enrich your lover and then your spouse, that's what we call conversion of campaign funds for personal use. It's also a federal offense. But wait, Kennedy said, clearly enjoying the theatrical presentation, it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. He pulled out a new document. Let's discuss the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board findings. You've been found guilty of campaign finance violations multiple times, haven't you? Omar's lawyer tried to object, but Kennedy continued over him. In 2019, the board found you guilty of using $3,469 in campaign funds for personal travel. You were also found to have used $1,500 in campaign funds to pay for personal tax preparation. Specifically, to correct those fraudulent joint returns we discussed earlier, using campaign funds to cover up tax deception that's creative, I'll give you that. He pulled out another receipt. But my favorite is this one. You used $6,000 in campaign funds to pay your divorce attorney, the divorce from Mr. Elmi, your brother, so you could marry Mr. Minette. Campaign donors unknowingly funded your transition from immigration deception to campaign finance abuse. It's almost poetic in its corruption. The progressive activists who had started the day cheering Omar were now filing out quietly, removing their solidarity hijabs as they went. The abandonment was becoming a stampede. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, Kennedy said, pulling out a fresh set of documents. Mr. Minette's latest business venture. Are you familiar with the Northside Wine Group, ma'am? Omar's face, already pale, went white. I have no involvement in my husband's business. No? Well, let me refresh your memory. Kennedy gestured to the gallery. Mr. Naeem Moad, would you please stand up? A well-dressed man in the gallery stood, his face angry. Mr. Moad invested $300,000 in your husband's wine business after being promised a 200% return in 18 months. That was 3 years ago. He hasn't seen a penny. In fact, Kennedy consulted his notes. Mr. Minette used that money to purchase a $1.3 million home in D.C., the home where you currently live. That's a lie, someone in the gallery shouted. But it was Moad himself. No, the lie was telling me it was for a winery, Moad shouted back. She knew they bought that mansion with my money, with my children's college fund. Security moved to restrain him, but Kennedy raised a hand. Let him speak. He's the victim here. They showed me fake contracts, fake wine inventories, Moad continued, his voice breaking. Tim Minette told me his wife's position would ensure the business succeeded. He said having a congresswoman as a partner guaranteed government contracts for events. I trusted them because of her. Thank you, Mr. Moad, Kennedy said gently. You may sit down. He turned back to Omar. Interesting that your husband invoked your position to defraud investors. But of course you knew nothing about it, right? He pulled out another document. Except, here's your financial disclosure form for 2023. You reported income from Northside Wine Group of between $100,000 and $1 million. You profited from your husband's deception, ma'am. That makes you an accessory after the fact. One of Omar's lawyers stood up. Senator, I must object to these unfounded accusations. Unfounded? Kennedy pulled out a final document. This is a civil suit filed last week in D.C. Superior Court. Mr. Moad is suing your client and her husband for deceit, breach of contract, and racketeering. The FBI has also opened an investigation based on interstate wire fraud. Did you know that, counselor? The lawyer sat back down without another word. So let's recap, Kennedy said, organizing his papers with theatrical precision. You used campaign funds to conduct an affair. You paid your lover's company hundreds of thousands in donor money. After marrying him, you paid him millions more. You used campaign funds to cover up tax deception. And now you're re-profiting from your husband's investment scheme. He looked directly at Omar. You've turned your congressional campaign into a criminal enterprise. Every donor who gave you $20 thinking they were supporting progressive values was actually funding your personal enrichment scheme. How do you sleep at night? Omar tried one last desperate defense. This is all politically motivated. You're trying to silence a strong woman of color. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted, his voice carrying a note of genuine disgust for the first time. Fraud isn't a cultural practice. Stealing isn't a religious belief. And misconduct doesn't become legal just because a woman of color commits it. You've dishonored every legitimate refugee who came to this country honestly, every woman who earned her position without corruption, and every Muslim who practices their faith without hiding behind it when caught breaking the law. The committee room was in complete disarray now. Democrats were openly discussing whether to call for Omar's resignation. Her own staff members were seen updating their resumes on their phones. The complete collapse of her support was happening in real time. "We're not done yet," Kennedy announced, reaching for yet another section of his seemingly bottomless folder. "We haven't even gotten to your discriminatory statements. Those are particularly illuminating about your character, or lack thereof." Omar slumped in her chair, defeated before the next round even began. The Southern gentleman had methodically dismantled her finances just as thoroughly as he had her personal life, and there was still more to come. Kennedy's demeanor shifted noticeably as he opened the next section of his folder. The gentle mockery that had characterized his earlier questioning was replaced by something harder, more serious. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Omar, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. "Now, Ma, we need to discuss your statements about Jewish Americans and Israel," he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone addressing a moral failing rather than mere criminal behavior. "These aren't just political disagreements. They re part of a pattern that goes to the heart of your fitness to serve in Congress." He pulled out a printed screenshot. "Let's start with February 2019. After Representative Kevin McCarthy criticized your support for the BDS movement, you tweeted, 'It's all about the Benjamins, baby.' When asked who you thought was paying American politicians to be pro-Israel, you responded, 'AIPAC.' Do you remember that?" Omar's lawyers were whispering urgently to her. She nodded slightly. "I apologized for that tweet." "Yes. After enormous pressure from your own party," Kennedy interrupted. "But apologies don't erase the sentiment behind the words. You invoked one of the oldest discriminatory tropes in existence, that Jewish people use money to control politics. And this wasn't an isolated incident." He pulled out another document. "But before we get to your other statements, let's look at what you really said in private." Kennedy's slight smile returned, but it held no warmth. "You see, we've obtained some of your deleted tweets. Did you know that when you delete a tweet, it's not really gone? Especially if someone screenshots it first." He held up the printed page. "This is from January 2019, before your Benjamin's comment. You wrote, 'AIPAC owns Congress. They buy politicians like groceries. Time to expose the puppet masters.' You deleted this within minutes, but not before it was captured." Gasps echoed through the committee room. Several Jewish Democrats on the committee looked visibly shaken. "Puppet masters," Kennedy repeated slowly. "Another classic discriminatory image. Jewish people as shadowy controllers pulling strings behind the scenes. But surely this was just poor word choice, right?" He pulled out an audio recorder. "This is from a private fundraiser in Minneapolis, March 2019. One of your donors was so disturbed by what you said that they recorded it and eventually provided it to investigators." He pressed play. Omar's voice filled the room. "The Jewish members of Congress. They can't be trusted on anything related to the Middle East. They have divided loyalties. They put Israel first, America second. We need to watch them carefully and counter their influence." The recording continued for another minute, each sentence more damaging than the last. When it finished, the room sat in stunned silence. "Dual loyalty accusations," Kennedy said quietly. "The same accusations used to justify historical atrocities and targeted attacks. You accused your Jewish colleagues of being traitors to America because of their religion." "That's taken out of context," Omar protested weakly. "The context makes it worse," Kennedy countered. He pulled out a transcript. "Should I play the full 10-minute recording where you go on to say that Jewish money controls our foreign policy and that we need to break their grip on power? Would that context help?" Two Jewish committee members stood up and walked out, one wiping tears from her eyes. The moral weight of what was being exposed was hitting everyone in the room. "But let's move forward in time," Kennedy continued, pulling out another screenshot. June 2021. You tweeted that the United States and Israel should be investigated for unthinkable atrocities alongside radical factions and militant groups. You equated democratic nations with violent extremist organizations. Why, I was calling for accountability. Were you? Because those extremist groups deliberately target civilians. They use violent assailants in public spaces and fire rockets at schools. Israel, whatever its faults, has a military justice system and rules of engagement. The United States, for all our mistakes, doesn't deliberately target civilians. But you saw them as morally equivalent to radicals. The only thing they have in common is that they oppose violent extremism. Is that why you equated them? Kennedy didn't wait for an answer. He pulled out a new set of documents. Let's discuss your funding sources. Since you are so concerned about foreign influence, are you familiar with the Council on American Islamic Relations, CARE? They a civil rights organization founded by members of radical factions, Kennedy interrupted. According to FBI evidence presented in federal court during the Holy Land Foundation trial, CARE was founded by people connected to extremist fundraising organizations, and you've been their guest of honor at multiple events. He showed photographs. Here you are at a CARE fundraiser in 2018. Here's another in 2019, and another in 2020. Each time, you gave speeches attacking Israel and questioning the loyalty of American Jews. Each time, you helped them raise money, some of which, he pulled out financial documents, ended up in your campaign coffers. Interesting how that works. But that's not all, Kennedy continued, his voice growing harder. Let's discuss your meetings with groups connected to violent factions. He produced State Department documents. In 2017, you met with representatives of charities that the Treasury Department has designated as extremist fundraising fronts. When warned by the FBI, you accused them of bias and continued the meetings. He pulled out another document. This is particularly interesting. Financial records show that in 2019, your campaign received donations from board members of the Qatar Foundation, the same Qatar that hosts militant leadership and funds their operations. You talk about Jewish money in politics, but you literally taking money from extremist supporters. Those are legitimate donations from American citizens who happen to work for Qatari state organizations. Kennedy finished. The hypocrisy is breathtaking. You accuse American Jews of having dual loyalty while taking money from foreign extremist supporters. You claim to care about human rights while equating democracies with radical organizations that commit severe human rights violations against marginalized groups and endanger civilians deliberately. He pulled out one final item from this section, a photograph. This is from your visit to a Palestinian refugee camp in 2019. You're standing next to Mahmoud Hassan, a known extremist operative, smiling, shaking hands. The Israeli government protested your meeting with a radical. Your response? You accused them of trying to silence you. Kennedy leaned back in his chair. The pattern is clear, Mom. You don't just criticize Israeli policy, which would be legitimate political discourse. You invoke ancient discriminatory tropes. You question the loyalty of Jewish Americans. You take money from radical supporters while accusing Jewish people of buying influence. And you meet with extremists while claiming to support human rights. He gestured to the largely empty Democratic side of the committee room. Your own Jewish Democratic colleagues have been trying to work with you for years. They've educated you about harmful tropes. They've begged you to stop using this language. And every time, you apologize publicly and then double down in private. Because this isn't ignorance. It's hatred. The remaining progressive supporters in the gallery had gone completely silent. Even they couldn't defend what they were hearing. We're not done, Kennedy announced, reaching for the thickest section of his folder yet. Because all of this, the fraud, the corruption, the hatred, it all comes together in your most famous statement. The one that reveals exactly who you are and what you really think of America. He paused for effect, looking directly at Omar. Let's talk about why you described September 11th as some people did something. Kennedy's entire demeanor transformed as he opened the final section of his folder. The gentle Southern courtesy vanished, replaced by something colder, more precise, the demeanor of a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument in a monumental case. He looked up at the gallery, where a group of people in the front row sat wearing pins with photographs of their loved ones. Before we continue, Kennedy said quietly, I want to acknowledge the 9/11 families who are here today. I know this will be difficult to hear, but America needs to understand exactly who sits in our Congress." He turned back to Omar, who had visibly paled at the mention of 9/11. "In March 2019, you gave a speech at a CARE fundraising event. CARE, the organization we just established, was founded by extremist supporters, and in that speech, you said something that revealed your true feelings about the most devastating tragedy on American soil since Pearl Harbor." Kennedy pulled out a tablet and connected it to the committee's screens. "Let's watch the full video, shall we?" Omar's lawyers tried to object, but the committee chairman, perhaps sensing the historical importance of the moment, overruled them. The video began to play on screen. Omar stood at a podium before a cheering crowd. Her voice filled the committee room. CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Kennedy paused the video. "Some people did something. That's how you describe the tragic loss of 2,977 Americans. Not radical extremists. Some people. Not a coordinated attack on our nation. Did something, like it was a minor incident not worth describing accurately." He let the words hang in the air before continuing. "But maybe you just misspoke. Maybe it was a poor choice of words in the moment. Except," he pulled out another document. "This is a transcript from a Minnesota Public Radio interview in 2013, 6 years earlier. When asked about 9/11, you said, 'America's military actions in the Middle East created the conditions for retaliation. We need to understand why they were so angry.' I was explaining root causes," Omar began. "Were you? Because there's more." Kennedy pulled out printouts of deleted social media posts. "September 11th, 2013, the anniversary of the attacks. You wrote on a Somali language forum, 'Americans overreact to 9/11. More people die from medical errors every year. They use it as an excuse for their imperialism.'" The 9/11 families in the gallery were openly weeping now. One man stood up, his voice shaking with rage. "My daughter died in the North Tower. She was 23 years old. She was not a statistic." Kennedy raised a hand gently. "Sir, I understand your pain. Please, let me finish. She needs to answer for all of it." He turned back to Omar. "But even that's not the worst part. Because we've obtained your WhatsApp messages from 2019 after your 'some people' comment created controversy." He pulled out printed screenshots, authenticated with digital signatures. In a group chat with what appears to be political activists, you wrote, "The American obsession with 9/11 is useful. Use their guilt against them. Every time they question us, bring up intolerance and discrimination after 9/11. Make them feel bad for their reaction rather than the attack itself." The committee room erupted. Even the Democrats who had remained couldn't stay silent. One shouted, "That's unconscionable," before remembering the microphones were on. "Use their guilt against them," Kennedy repeated slowly. "You saw the taking of thousands of American lives not as a tragedy, but as a political tool to manipulate grieving families and traumatize citizens." He pulled out another document. "But wait, it gets worse. This is from your FBI security clearance review in 2019. Concerns were raised about some of your statements regarding extremism. Do you know what you told the FBI agents conducting your interview?" Omar remained silent, her face ashen. "You said, 'American foreign policy is the real menace. What happened on September 11th was chickens coming home to roost.' You told federal agents that America deserved September 11th. Several Capitol Police officers in the room noticeably stiffened. These were their colleagues who had died defending the building. And here was a member of Congress saying, 'America deserved to be attacked. The agents recommended against granting you access to classified briefings,'" Kennedy continued. "Their report says, 'Subject shows troubling sympathy for anti-American narratives and inability to condemn violent extremism without equivocation.' But Democratic leadership overruled them. Political considerations outweighed security concerns." He pulled out a final document from this section. This is perhaps the most damning of all. A statement from Imam Abdisalam Adam of the Islamic Center of Minneapolis. one of the most respected Muslim leaders in your own district. Kennedy read, I have counseled Congresswoman Omar repeatedly about her rhetoric. I have explained that her words bring shame upon all Muslim Americans who love this country. Her minimization of 9/11, her refusal to clearly condemn extremism, her constant portrayal of Muslims as victims even when individuals commit violence, she damages our entire community. She does not represent Islam. She represents only her own hatred and ambition. Your own imam, Kennedy said quietly, the spiritual leader of your own community, says you bring shame to Muslims. Because real Muslim Americans understand what you apparently don't, that you can be Muslim and love America, that you can practice Islam and condemn violent extremism, that you can maintain your faith without minimizing mass atrocities. He stood up, something he hadn't done throughout the entire hearing. At his full height, the elderly senator suddenly seemed to fill the room. Representative Omar. Thousands of Americans died on September 11th. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, atheists. Extremism doesn't discriminate among the dead. There were Muslim first responders who ran into those buildings to save others. You dishonor their memory when you refuse to call their killers what they were, radical extremists. He looked at the 9/11 families. These families have waited over 20 years for justice, for acknowledgement, for the simple human decency of having their loss recognized. And you sit in the People's House, collecting a salary paid by their tax dollars, and call the loss of their loved ones something done by some people. The moral weight of Kennedy's words seemed to press down on the room. Several people in the gallery were sobbing openly. Even hardened reporters looked shaken. This isn't about politics, Kennedy continued, his voice rising for the first time. This isn't about party or ideology. This is about basic human decency. This is about whether someone who cannot bring herself to condemn violent extremism, who sees the mass tragedy of Americans as a political opportunity, who takes money from radical supporters while accusing others of dual loyalty, whether such a person should have access to our nation's secrets and a vote on our nation's laws. He pulled out one final document. This came to my office this morning. It's from the Director of National Intelligence. Based on the evidence presented today, your security clearance is being immediately revoked pending a full review. You will no longer have access to classified briefings. You cannot serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee or any committee dealing with national security. Omar's lawyers jumped to their feet, shouting objections, but Kennedy continued over them. Furthermore, the FBI will be opening investigations into your ties to foreign extremist organizations, your immigration fraud, and your campaign finance violations. The IRS will be reviewing your tax deception. The House Ethics Committee will be investigating all of the above, plus your discriminatory statements and abuse of office. He sat back down, his energy seemingly spent. Your career in Congress is over, ma'am. Not because of your religion, or your race, or your gender, but because you're a fraud, a thief, and an extremist sympathizer who somehow managed to con your way into the United States Congress. The committee room exploded into chaos. Democrats were fleeing for the exits. Republicans were calling for immediate expulsion votes. The 9/11 families were standing and applauding through their tears. And in the middle of it all, Ilhan Omar sat frozen, her political life destroyed, her actions exposed, her true nature revealed to the world. The Southern gentleman had delivered the final blow. As the chaos in the committee room continued, Omar made one last desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her career. She stood up shakily, gripping the table for support, and tried to shout over the noise. "This is McCarthyism!" she cried, her voice cracking. "This is a targeted smear campaign designed to silence a strong Muslim woman who dares to speak truth to power." Kennedy looked at her with what might have been pity. "Ma'am, Joe McCarthy was wrong because he made accusations without evidence. I have." He gestured to the mountain of documents spread across the table, 127 pieces of documented evidence. Financial records, emails, audio recordings, video footage, sworn testimony, government documents. This isn't McCarthyism. This is accountability. He pulled out his phone and showed the screen to the committee. In fact, your colleagues are already providing more accountability. This just came in. A statement from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The room quieted as Kennedy read from his phone. I am shocked and dismayed by the revelations about Representative Omar. While I have defended her right to criticize policy, I cannot and will not defend fraud, corruption, or prejudice. She has betrayed the progressive movement and must resign immediately. AOC. Omar gasped, her last hope crumbling. Oh, there's more, Kennedy continued, scrolling through his phone. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, I am heartbroken, but cannot defend the indefensible. Senator Bernie Sanders' discrimination has no place in our movement. The entire squad has abandoned you, ma'am. But Kennedy wasn't done. Actually, I have something even more interesting. Text messages between squad members that were leaked to the press this morning. He pulled out printed screenshots. From Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez to Congresswoman Presley, dated last month, Ilhan is becoming a massive liability. Her rhetoric is hurting our entire movement. We need to distance ourselves before she takes us all down. And here S1 from Congresswoman Tlaib, I can't keep defending her. My own Palestinian constituents are embarrassed by her inflammatory remarks. She's making us all look like extremists. Each revelation was another nail in Omar's political coffin. Her closest allies, the people who had stood by her through every previous controversy, had been planning to abandon her even before today's hearing. The committee chairman, who had been trying to restore order, finally gave up and addressed Omar directly. Representative Omar, these are extremely serious allegations. I think we need to hear your response to the evidence presented. Omar's lawyers tried to whisper advice, but she pushed them away. You want a response? This is all lies. Fabricated evidence. I am being targeted because I'm a black Muslim woman who won't bow down. Ma'am, the chairman interrupted, his patience exhausted. I've reviewed this evidence. These are authenticated government documents, verified emails, and recorded conversations. As chairman of this committee, I'm calling for an immediate ethics investigation into all of these matters. He looked around at his Democratic colleagues. I'm also going to recommend that the Democratic caucus meet in emergency session to consider removing Representative Omar from all committee assignments pending these investigations. You can do that, Omar shouted. Actually, I can. And I will. The chairman's voice was firm. No member of Congress is above the law or above accountability. At that moment, another Democratic member stood up, Congressman Gerald Nadler, one of the most senior Jewish Democrats in the House. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a statement signed by every Jewish Democratic member of the House. Without objection, the chairman said. Nadler read. We have tried for years to work with Representative Omar, to educate her about harmful tropes, to help her understand why her words cause pain. She has repeatedly promised to do better and repeatedly broken those promises. The evidence presented today shows a pattern of deliberate intolerance that cannot be excused as ignorance. We call for her immediate resignation. The hits kept coming. Kennedy pulled out one final document. Oh, I almost forgot. This just arrived from the Speaker's office. He read, Speaker Pelosi states Representative Omar must answer these serious allegations. No member of Congress is above accountability. The House will take all appropriate actions to maintain the integrity of this institution. Even Pelosi, who had protected Omar through previous controversies, was cutting her loose. Omar looked around the room wildly, searching for any friendly face, any ally, any hope. There were none. Even her own staff members were packing up their things, preparing to abandon the sinking ship. You can do this, she screamed. I am the voice of my community. I represent. You represent no one but yourself, Kennedy interrupted, his voice cutting through her hysteria. You've betrayed the Somali community by making them look like extremists. You've betrayed the Muslim community by hiding your crimes behind their faith. You've betrayed the progressive community by corrupting their movement with your actions. And you've betrayed America by taking our generosity and repaying it with fraud and contempt. He stood up again, gathering his documents with methodical precision. I came here today expecting to question someone about policy disagreements. Instead, I've exposed a criminal enterprise operating in the United States Congress. You've committed immigration fraud, tax fraud, campaign finance fraud. You've taken money from radical supporters. You've spread ancient prejudices, and you've disrespected the memories of 9/11 victims while claiming to represent American values. The security clearance revocation was announced over the committee's speaker system at that moment, perfect timing that seemed almost choreographed. Attention. By order of the Director of National Intelligence, Representative Ilhan Omar's security clearance has been revoked, effective immediately. She is to be denied access to all classified materials and secure facilities. No, Omar wailed. You can't. It's done, Kennedy said simply. You're now a member of Congress who can attend intelligence briefings, can't serve on relevant committees, can't access the information needed to do your job. You're effectively neutralized as a legislator. He looked around the room one last time. Ladies and gentlemen, we've witnessed something historic today. Not the persecution of a minority, but the exposure of a fraud. Not a smear campaign, but a reckoning. The system worked. Truth prevailed. Justice was served. As he packed up his materials, Capitol police officers entered the room. Representative Omar, one said formally, we need to escort you to surrender your security credentials immediately. The sight of Omar being led away by security, her career in ruins, her crimes exposed, her allies fled, was the final image of her destruction. She turned back one last time, her face twisted with rage and tears. This isn't over, she screamed. I'll fight this, No, Mom, Kennedy said quietly, not even looking up from his packing. It's over. You're redone. America has rejected you. Your party has abandoned you. And justice has finally caught up with you. The only question now is whether you'll be prosecuted in federal or state court first. As Omar was led away, still shouting about persecution and intolerance, Kennedy finished packing his documents. He nodded politely to the chairman, tipped an imaginary hat to the 9/11 families, and walked out of the committee room with the same quiet dignity with which he'd entered. Behind him, he left the wreckage of a political career, the exposure of years of deceit, and the restoration of some small measure of justice for those who had been wronged by Ilhan Omar's actions. The Southern gentleman had won, truth had prevailed, and American democracy had proved it could still clean its own house when necessary. Within hours of the hearing's end, the political earthquake triggered by Kennedy's methodical dismantling of Ilhan Omar sent shockwaves through Washington and beyond. By 3:00 p.m., the Minnesota Democratic Farmer-Labor Party released a terse statement. In light of today's revelations, we call upon Representative Omar to resign immediately. The evidence presented raises serious questions that demand answers. We cannot and will not support any candidate under federal investigation for fraud. The first Muslim member of Congress to call for her resignation was Representative Andre Carson of Indiana, who released a heartfelt statement. As a proud Muslim American, I am heartbroken by today's revelations. Representative Omar has damaged our community's reputation and undermined our efforts to combat real prejudice. Her actions do not represent Islam or Muslim Americans. She must resign. By evening, Omar's own constituents were protesting outside her Minneapolis office. The crowd included Somali Americans holding signs reading, "She does not represent us, and fraud is not our culture." Local Imam Abdisalam Adam, whom Kennedy had quoted, led prayers for truth and justice to prevail. The legal consequences moved even faster than the political ones. The U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota announced that the FBI had opened formal investigations into immigration violations, tax deception, and campaign finance breaches. The IRS Criminal Division confirmed they were reviewing multiple years of potentially fraudulent returns. The Federal Election Commission announced an expedited review of all campaign expenditures to Tim Mynette's firms. As night fell, Omar released a defiant statement through her lawyer. Today's hearing was nothing but a politically motivated attack designed to silence a strong Muslim woman of color. I categorically deny all allegations and look forward to vindicating myself. I will not resign. I will not be silenced. But her defiance rang hollow. Within her own party, she had become radioactive. Democrats who had previously defended her were racing to delete old tweets of support. The Congressional Progressive Caucus announced she had been suspended pending investigation. The Congressional Black Caucus released a statement emphasizing that integrity and honesty are non-negotiable values for our members. Cable news coverage was brutal across the political spectrum. CNN's headline read, "The Unraveling of Ilhan Omar, How a Rising Star Became Congress's Biggest Scandal." Even MSNBC, typically sympathetic to progressive Democrats, led with "Kennedy exposes years of Omar fraud in devastating hearing." On social media, hashtags surrounding the confrontation trended worldwide. The leaked messages about using guilt as a political tool particularly outraged 9/11 families and survivors. The September 11th Families Association released a statement calling her comments beneath contempt and demanding she be expelled from Congress. International reactions were equally damning. The Somali government distanced itself, with the ambassador stating, "If these allegations are true, she has brought shame upon all Somali people." Israeli media covered the story extensively, with one commentator noting her rhetoric was an open secret. The only surprise is that it took this long to expose the rest. By midnight, the first Democrat had announced a primary challenge to Omar. Don Samuels, who had nearly defeated her in the previous primary, released a video declaring, "Minneapolis deserves honest representation. We deserve better than fraud and division. I am running to restore integrity to this seat." Senator Kennedy, for his part, gave only one brief interview to a local Louisiana station. Sitting on his porch in Madisonville, he seemed more sad than triumphant. "I don't take any pleasure in what happened today," he said in his characteristic drawl. "Watching someone destroy their own life through greed and divisive actions is never pleasant. But sometimes you have to lance a boil to heal the body. Congress had an infection, and today we began the treatment." When asked if he had any regrets, Kennedy considered the question carefully. "My only regret is that it took this long. How many people were hurt by her deceit? How many Jewish Americans were wounded by her words? How many Muslim Americans were embarrassed by her actions? If we acted sooner, maybe less damage would have been done." "What's next?" the interviewer asked. Kennedy smiled slightly. "Well, I imagine there will be a special election in Minnesota soon enough. As for me, I've got other oversight work to do. Corruption doesn't stop just because you expose one person. But today was a good day for truth, a good day for justice, and despite all the ugliness we had to wade through, a good day for America." The interview ended with Kennedy looking out over the Louisiana bayou, the setting sun reflecting off the water. "You know," he said quietly, "this country gave that woman everything. Refuge from war, education, opportunity, even high office. And she repaid it with lies and harmful rhetoric. But in the end, the system worked. Truth won. That's the America I still believe in." As his figure faded into the evening shadows, one truth remained clear: John Kennedy had done more than ruin a corrupt politician. He had reminded Washington that facts still matter, that evidence still counts, and that no one, no matter their identity or ideology, is above the law. The Southern gentleman had delivered justice with courtesy, facts, and devastating effectiveness, and in doing so, he had restored a small piece of faith in American democracy. The reckoning was complete. Will this dramatic congressional showdown fundamentally change how we view political accountability, or is it merely another chapter in the endless theater of modern politics? What are your thoughts on this confrontation?